Good morning and welcome to Creekside's online Sunday morning service. We're glad to have you with us. My name's Jeremy Mann. I'm one of the elders here at Creekside, and we're glad that you've chosen to connect with us through the online service this morning. One other thing I want to share with you that has begun here at Creekside just this past week is our weekly outside in-person gathering every Sunday morning. We're gathering at 10:15 a.m. every Sunday morning that rain is not falling from the sky. It's for our outdoor journey service, and please bring your chair, your blanket, and your mask, as well as your cup of coffee, and join us out there for our time together of worship, as well as opening the Word together. Derek Ewan is leading us through the book of Ephesians. And not only is this a cool way for us to gather during this global pandemic that respects and honors the regulations in place, as well as protects everybody who shows up, as we'll be socially distanced and wearing masks as much as possible, unless you're sipping your coffee. But it's also a great way for us to experience opening the Bible together in a similar way to what communities experienced in the Old Testament, of coming together as a community around the fire and the fire pit, the campfire, and telling stories of God and His faithfulness to His people. This is exactly what we're doing. We're benefiting a little bit from the technology of heat lamps as well, but also having fires out there with smoke in the air and the crackle of the fire, and we're gathering together as a community to tell stories of our God and His faithfulness to us. We'd love for you to join us. Again, this is 10:15 Sunday mornings, every Sunday morning that rain's not falling from the sky. So if you get in your car and your windshield's dry, we'll be out there. If there's rain hitting the windshield, back into bed and join us for the online service. But have a great day. God bless you this week, and thanks again for joining us.
Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name and still call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, 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 Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus.
Well, good morning once again, Creekside. I trust you're well. You've survived the great wind off. I hope everything is well in your homes and in your hearts and your minds. We are in our 9th week of this 10-week series that I started last year, entitled 10 Learnings from a Lifetime, kind of like core values that we hold dear here at Creekside. Although this one's a little different, but it builds. This may be a little more new than the other 9, but it builds on this idea of kind of standing on your X and calling and these types of things. This morning we will turn to our 9th topic, which I've entitled "Pregnancies in Life," when God is giving birth to something new. Creation is so much of what we see in the story of God, which is kind of interesting because I'm going to disagree with that and then build upon that. Even though it's interesting that in the Bible there are something like 1,900 chapters, there's only 2 chapters on creation. So it's so funny, we make the whole story, as if Genesis 1 and 2 are the paramount picture in all of the Bible. And really, there's only 2 chapters on the actual creation process. And so it's a very small piece. And yet, the flip side of that is, there's a theme of creation that runs throughout the grand narrative. The story starts with creation in Genesis. The story ends with kind of new creation, with the new heavens and the new earth in Revelation. And in between, God births himself into humanity, and through that brings new creation into each of us. Remember that famous verse that we studied in 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, behold, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. Right? So you have to ask kind of why, I think. Why is creation, since the creation story is so short, why is it such a theme in the Bible? Even though the rest of the Bible is not about the actual creation of the earth. Creation to me is more than something God does. Creation to me is an expression of who God is. Why do I say that? The Trinity is creative in nature. Anything good that we have, we've gotten from them. And our creativity is birthed out of their creativity. God's creation, when God generates, it's an expression of their creativity, Father, Son, and Spirit. There's a reason we marvel at nature as the obvious example. If we stand before Yosemite or Lake Tahoe or or just go to the Sierras or the giant redwoods here on the coast, or of late there's been massive swells, and we've been down in Santa Cruz several times, and these 20 to 30 foot waves that are just awe-inspiring. And we marvel not just at what we see, I think we marvel at God. Many of you know that I bow hunt, and I love chasing elk in September. And I was blessed to be able to go on an elk trip with Doug Abbott and Paul Vinogradoff and Matt Lyman. And there was one, we paired up, so two guys would go with a guide and two guys would go with a guide. And Doug Abbott and I were with the outfitter, a guy named Terry. And we went to a place that he affectionately calls the barn. There's a barn out there, and it was just an insane evening. Doug and I sat down, and we were, I don't know, maybe 100 yards apart, 75 yards apart. And normally when you're elk hunting, if you get one opportunity, I mean, not even to shoot, just for a bull elk to bugle and call back and forth, it's just, it can be unnerving. We had, I think Doug and I counted 9 bulls that were coming, anywhere from, they were all within 75 yards. We had bulls inside of 15 yards, just neither of us could get a shot off. They were just there. I had 2 behind me and 1 in front of me with cows, and they were just screaming and bugling, and our outfitter's up on the hill, and he's doing cow calls, and they're just fired up and going crazy. And Doug and I got in the truck, and I started to kind of unravel. And by the time we had driven 45 minutes back to the ranch house, the lodge kind of where we stayed, I was like, my hands were shaking. It was just like it had caught up to me. And I know that may sound silly for those of you that don't hunt, but when you stand in front of a 1,000-pound animal like the majesty of an elk and listen to this thing screaming and bugling at you, and you're trying to stay calm and on edge so that you can maybe shoot if you get an opportunity, it was one of the most magnificent nights I've ever had, and Doug Abbott would tell you the same thing. His creation is an expression of his creativity, and that's what it was that evening for us. Romans 1:20 says this, a very famous verse, for God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. You notice that? We saw his nature after he created, because he's creative. Job 12:7, but ask the beasts and they will teach you, the birds of the heavens and they will tell you, or the bushes of the earth and they will teach you, and the fish in the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is life and every living thing, and the breath of all mankind. See, the image of God is seen through his creation. And what's fascinating is the image God uses for creation is actually birth or birthing. When God creates, he is, out of his very creative and majestic nature, giving birth to something new. Psalm 90, verse 1, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you gave birth to the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. Isn't that a fascinating image? When the psalmist, in this case Moses, describes God, really specifically Jesus, since he is the one of the three, he is the agent of creation of the three of them. When Moses describes Jesus creating the earth and the world, he says he birthed it. It is as if God comes up with this grand idea, or rather is impregnated in a sense with his creative concept. You can imagine like a beautiful, cool morning, and the Father, Son, and Spirit, the three of them walking through a meadow with the sun kind of beaming on them, and they begin to dream up the idea of a creative thought or creative process, much like, say, a young couple would do when they are dreaming dreaming or discussing having kids. The idea incubates within the Trinity in this kind of pregnant state, and then he births something new. A waterfall, a new tributary, a rising in the earth's crust that uplifts the mountains, a river that cuts so deeply over such a long period of time, we have something like the Grand Canyon. The Trinity dreams, and they plan, and they form thoughts within one another, and they become pregnant with that thought, and then it gives birth to something new. I know that sounds probably like a strange concept, maybe not coming from a guy like me, but that's actually what I believe the Bible is, the image that the Bible wants us to have. Pregnancy is gestation. 2 cells become 26 billion by birth. There's a guy by the name of David Perlmutter, and he wrote this book on detoxing your mind. And he states that the 3-pound brain has more connections than there are stars in the galaxy. Every one of us, by the way. God's creative nature giving birth to new life, new plans, new beginnings, much like a pregnant woman giving birth to new life. And I believe that is what we see throughout the grand narrative. But not just in the birth of nature, things like elk and waterfalls, but deep plans unfolding through his image-bearing people, you and I. Creation, plans, pregnant ideas that God is giving birth to through his people, meaning us. We saw this in Moses' call when God meets him in the burning bush in Exodus. Moses had to flee Egypt and spent 40 years out in the desert in Midian with Jethro, who became his father-in-law. 40 years God waited, impregnated in a sense with this idea to call Moses to actually free the Israelites from Egypt. And when God did call Moses from the bush, it took time for this plan to come fruition. And when they were finally free from Egypt, it took another 40 years before they stood before Jericho to enter the promised land on Mount Nebo. We see this in the idea in Abraham's call to leave all and follow God. Go to a place, Abraham, you do not know, or I will not tell you. Leave the only people that you love and that are familiar with you, and prepare for what you don't know that you will do, because I'm not even going to explain it to you yet. The Trinity decides to rescue humanity by building a nation through one dude named Abraham. And eventually they, the Father, Son, and Spirit, birth, because that's our word, Jesus through Abraham's Jewish lineage. What a major shift in Abraham's life. The single man of an entire nation, like a single cell of an infant that becomes billions. Pregnancy changes the course of things, and it reshapes our very being. This is a major shift in a man's life where God is simply giving birth to newness. We see this in the Apostle Paul's life on several occasions. We see this in his road to Emmaus experience, right? And that was a little different because it's a conversion of sorts, where he comes to Jesus. But Paul's a guy that understood a lot about God already. He already believed in God, right? But this was a major shift in his life and call. We see it in his missionary trips, the time in his life where he took these big 3 in particular missionary trips, each one very different from the other, but a pattern unfolded through these missionary trips. We see it when after these trips, everyone wanted him to stay away from Jerusalem, but he knew that God was calling him back there. And eventually he was jailed there and almost died there. And then after these trips in Jerusalem, when everybody wants him to get back to these same Eastern trips, God moves him westward to Italy and to Rome. Italy and Rome and Europe. His Eastern ministry is essentially complete, and God is moving him in everything he knew to the West and to Europe. We see it in Samuel being called at night. Samuel gets called as a priest of God in a time where God was extremely silent and not really talking. It was a call to a major shift in Samuel's life. And what is fascinating about this is what the text says shortly after Samuel gets called by God. That shift, that pregnant idea beginning to give birth within Samuel. 1 Samuel 3:19. And Samuel grew. That's a word of length. He grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. Pregnancy takes time. Samuel hears the idea, and then it takes time before God gives birth to it through him. Over and over, we see this idea of God being impregnated with an idea, and over time, kind of doling that out to his people and giving birth to something new. When Jacob wrestled with Jesus in the Old Testament, Mary in her actual pregnancy, Peter with the blessing over him and the proclamation that Jesus made that he would build his church upon this rock. And we even see this with Jesus himself. Why does Jesus start his ministry at 30? There are, of course, rabbinical reasons for this, but I think there's a more obvious answer. The Father, pregnant with his plan, gives birth to it in the movement of Jesus growing from childhood to messiahship. And this is not the only time we see this in Jesus' life. If you were around for our lengthy study, it took over a year, in the Gospel of Luke, you might remember Jesus has about a year left of his 3-year ministry. Geographically, he's as far north in Israel as you can possibly stand before you step into Lebanon. And he turns south and faces south, and this is what it says in Luke 9:15. After this, everything shifts in his life. This is what the verse says. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. Everything Jesus says from then on is different. Everything Jesus does from then on is different. God is during this last year giving birth through Jesus with something new. And it did not look at all like his first 2 years of ministry. This has been the same exact pattern in my life, by the way. And these major shifts, they do not happen all the time. In fact, I think they only happen maybe a handful or less in any of our lives. And by the way, they are so significant. When I was 20 or so, as I've shared many times, I felt God leaning on me to be a pastor and calling me into this. And it turned into a long, pregnant idea of God's. And it would be almost 30 years before God would ask me to take the lead pastor role at our church in Creekside. All the while, God was pastoring me and growing me and building me kind of brick by brick. And when I was 30, having just started and led a youth group in Pleasant Hill, at a little church in Pleasant Hill, after 7 years of Lynn and I leading this youth group, obviously rolling along because this is what God had asked me to do, to pastor, he suddenly pulled me completely out of ministry for 4 long years, falling apart, recognizing and embracing my own brokenness, getting counseling, healing, studying, lingering with God. It was a massive shift for me in my thinking, in my theology, in my awareness, in my ability to connect and relate with people. And like all pregnancies, it was painful. It was nauseating at times. It was extremely disorienting. When God is giving birth to something new within us, it is not easy. It's painful. That's what pregnancy brings. And any woman that has born a child knows this. Excitement, yes, and pain, and disillusionment, and confusion, and loss. And yet always within this, God births life through this change. Remember that set of verses in Isaiah 43 that Jackie Clipness kind of introduced us to some months ago in the interview I did with her, that we focused on several times during this time of the pandemic. Isaiah 43:18, remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. When God does something new, he is birthing new life. But it requires him also to, quote unquote, make a way in the wilderness. That means, first of all, it's a way that hasn't existed before, so it's difficult to cut through that new line. And second of all, it's wilderness, folks. It's dry and lonely and hot and uncomfortable. Remember when God called Moses at the bush? It was unbelievably uncomfortable for Moses. In fact, he tried to squirm his way out of it for an entire chapter or two in the book of Exodus. It was painful and scary. Any massive change like this is, and Moses fought it. Pregnancy always brings pain and discomfort. That's unfortunately just part of the process. When I was 30, after teaching twice a week for 7 years, God just parked me, like I said, and people did not understand. People close to me did not understand. People were asking me to teach. People were asking me to lead, but I knew in my soul God was asking me to sit in the ashes with him and not move, not minister, not give out, but actually let him just do something within. When God impregnates an idea within us, others won't necessarily get it. And that's obvious because, heck, we don't even know what God is doing necessarily during that time. When I was 40, 3 people had prophecies that I was going to lead Creekside from the pulpit and shared those with me. And 2 of those people I did not know. And the one of the 3 I've never seen before or since. And here it is, 8 years later, and God asked me to take the pulpit, right? 8 years after those 3 prophecies. Pregnancy, giving birth. The end result is cool, but getting there, not so fun. It's a difficult thing to go through. I had to hold those words within me very quietly in silence, sharing with almost nobody in my life, waiting, watching for God to bring life forth. Like Mary, quietly pondering what she knew in her heart. Being watchful to make sure I wasn't pushing something, my own agenda, or just moving to what made sense in the future, and rather than waiting on God to unfold this, in a sense, secret that he had to share with me. And a secret that he would only give me a little piece at a time. And I can feel that again in my life right now. I have been in it for a year, and it took me I've been in it for about a year and a half, and it took about a year before I realized I was in it, which is incredibly quick for me for one of these big shifts in my life. But I've been here, but I recognize it, I think, because I've been here before multiple times. And I can tell this is going to last a while. Partly God is coinciding this with me kind of heading towards 60. I'm almost 58, and I can feel it physically. I cannot do what I used to be able to do, nor do I actually even want to do what I've done before. My energy has changed, but I think in a positive way. I've slowed down, and really, at this point in my life, it's so much about what matters and what God really wants me to focus on, and shedding the rest. Partly, I think God is using my first grandchild, Bodhi, to validate this pregnancy and shift within me. And you might have seen it even in my teaching through this time of the pandemic. In this first 9 years that I've kind of had the lead pastor role, I think I literally did 2, maybe tops 3 topical series. As you know, I just don't do them very often, even though some people want me to. I always kind of teach through books of the Bible or the life of so-and-so or whatever. And yet in the last 6 months, I have taught 3 back-to-back topical series. And it's all because God is pressing something new through me. He has wanted me, particularly these last 6 months, to sum up what he wants me to share. And I know there have been maybe some of you out there that want me to go verse by verse. And I know others of you are loving this topical style and even these interviews that I'm doing, right? And I don't mean this in a cold way, but just in a truthful way. None of that input really matters to me or affects me in any way. I am simply doing what God is pressing upon me and asking me to do. And it feels to me like God is birthing something new. And where this will end up, I have absolutely no idea, right? But that's not a problem for me because God has been faithful to me. He has always been faithful to me, and he is faithful, and he will be faithful. And he's going to make his path clear to me, and I just need to keep trusting him and waiting until he unfolds that. And I gladly lay my life bare before him to move in any way that he sees fit. Knowing all the while pregnancy and giving birth is not easy. Something usually has to die off when something new is created. We must learn to not hold onto that which has been, laying it aside for God to be able to birth the beauty of what will be, right? For the outcome that He desires. I think this is true in all of our lives. I think all of us experience this with God. God is about expressing Himself in beautiful ways, in new ways. God is creative in nature and always is about new life. And His deep desire is to partner with us in this birthing process. The key is we need to be able to recognize it when it's happening and settle into the discomfort, knowing that He is trustworthy, and to not fight it, but rather rest in it while He grows His thought through us into the existence before us. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're laughing because the audience never sees me clap a couple times, and then the person has to go, "What is he doing?" I'm not clapping for you, Nate. You haven't done anything yet. If this goes really well, I'll clap for you afterwards.
That plays right into my whole emotional journey right now of needing everyone's approval. So
I love it because I didn't announce to anybody these interviews. You're actually the 9th and final interview. I have one more talk after this, but I'm not going to do an interview. I'll interview Jesus, as it were. But I think it's fun for people to just go, who's he going to select for this discussion? So for you, I select pregnancies in life. How's that for? So I asked you this. We were chatting just a minute ago. This is a weird way to describe this, and I say that in my sermon. You've read my script, and people that just listen to it. It's a weird thought. Part of it is I remember that scene, and not everybody loves the book. I think it's fantastic, but in the shack where Jesus and the Father and the Spirit are walking in this kind of meadow, and they're just discussing and talking, and we know anything good that we do comes from them. If we laugh and it's good, they laugh. If we joke and it's not hurtful and sarcastic, they joke. This is where we get it from.
Yeah.
If we create and birth new ideas, either together or on our own, we don't get this from nowhere. And so there's this idea in the Bible where, really it almost describes the creation as the Father's thought. But Jesus is like, clearly I'm the artist here. The Father's the engineer and Jesus is the artist, right? So not strange, but does it?
yeah, I mean, I think the language even of being impregnated or Holy Spirit is odd at first to me.
Yeah.
But the idea really resonates with me and where I've been at for a while.
Yeah.
The idea of feeling like God's doing something and getting a hint of it.
Yes.
And then getting a little bigger hint of it. And then maybe a whisper of it.
Yeah.
And then at some point starting to feel like this sense of, oh, God's doing something. And now the voice is getting a little louder over time. And I know God's doing something.
Yes.
And it's connected to me and it's in me.
Right.
But it's not just me.
Right.
And I think even in that early process for me, it's like I get back into the process when I'm quiet with God again.
Okay.
So I could maybe work really hard on things for a week and not feel the pregnancy.
Right.
And then a week later, have a couple hours where I take a walk with God or I do a prayer of examine and I'm just connected to, God is doing, He told me this 2 weeks ago. And now I'm back in this mode of God, what are you doing?
So the idea behind this is God had to come up with that at some point, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a little mechanical to think every thought, that God it always was.
Yeah.
I think that's not relational. I think that's not really a good painting of the Trinity. I think that's depersonalizing them. And so really this idea is that they formulated that way, way before, and then there's a leaking, if you will. It's like, you might do that with your kids. I mean, you're not going to unfold the whole thing with your kids because they can't handle it. It's too much.
Yeah.
But you can't not include them is the thought.
Yeah.
So, and I picked you not because of this word pregnant, but I picked you because you and I regularly spend time together. And we've been kind of we always meet with each other, probably every other month, I would say, something like that. And we've been doing that for
A long time.
10 years at least since I've been taking the lead,
Yeah.
probably longer than that. Probably met more than that and had some heavy, just cool conversations during this pandemic, partly because we've both been in this kind of pregnancy period. So describe that. I mean, the church knows you well. The church knows this ministry you were doing in Oakland, and all of a sudden you kind of sent this letter out to say, hey, I'm going to stop it for a while, or I'm going to stop it.
Yeah, it's been wild.
Yeah, and
so
you did that late. When did you kind of tell people?
So I was thinking about a year ago.
Yeah.
So I mean, right around a year, and I think I last preached at Creekside in January.
Yes.
Which I know because Kobe Bryant died a year ago, and I remember on a Sunday people coming up to me after I preached and talking about that.
And you shared this process with people.
Yeah, you nudged me to share more than I think I was planning on the first draft of that message.
And the church has been supporting you financially. A lot of people too, which is cool because you're still walking with God and a minister of the gospel.
Yeah. So I think I'll get into details, but while you were talking, I thought of this phrase someone mentioned last week in a class I was in of the divine dance.
Yes.
And part of it to me feels like this divine dance. Like God is leading and with me, and I'm like learning to dance with God and
stepping wrong.
Yeah. So it's like God is leading, but there's also God gives us this freedom in kind of how we follow it and how we interact with what God's doing. But that image of a divine dance with God really just stuck with me last week.
Yeah. Can you let me try it this way. And I want you to describe it today, and then I want you to, and you don't have to go into massive deep detail, and then I want you to share the unfolding.
Okay.
So like, what's clear to you now after, is it a year?
Yeah.
A little over, maybe longer than a year, because you were feeling it more than a year. What's clear to you now about what God is leading you
There's probably
towards?
two ways I could answer that in two categories.
Okay.
One category in a practical sense of what I'm made to do in the world and what I think I will be doing and really have been doing even this year. Is really following this desire and passion for basketball in the community. Not just coaching for coaching's sake or to win, but like to mold young people, to mentor young people.
What does that look like? Give me an example.
Looks like coaching. So two things. One could be like with people one-on-one. So like training somebody and then being a mentor, a mentor figure in their life. Yeah. So I've been training just very recently, like 5 to 6 college age guys who want to play in college.
Wow.
It's a really long story how I got there.
Yeah.
It's way better players than I've coached in the past.
Yeah. Christians, not Christians.
Probably both, a mix.
Okay.
A mix. Guys who would say they're Christians, but I don't know, different. But doing it sessions for them 2 or 3 times a week, but then taking them out to lunch, calling them, texting them, checking if they're going to get signed up for classes, checking on how they're doing with their family, their girlfriend, their life. So it's
as a means to intertwine your heart.
Yeah, and it's a means of God's taught me this more clearly. It's a way that I pastor. And I don't always use that word, but to me I've had this desire on and off to be more of a pastor. And I've had a wrestling of my identity. Am I really a pastor? Am I what does that look like? And I've had this deeper sense of being with these guys and God telling me, this is a way that you shepherd.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody else sees it the way you do. Maybe it's not the way you saw it in a book, but you love these guys, care for them, think about them, pray for them on the drive there. Like,
well, think about the Apostle Paul. When he showed up at Philippi, he would have been hilariously happy to have 5 people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is not new.
Yeah. And then I have my middle school guys. So I've got 12 to 20 or more guys that I'm with. We do beach workouts because we can't get in a gym. And we do a Zoom dribble workout with Tion Connor from Creekside, which is super cool.
Wow.
Just to get to see him for a half hour
cool.
on Friday. But then same kind of idea. It's like being a youth pastor, but not where I'm like checking on them. And a lot of their dads and moms are deep friends now, and we have long, deep talks about life and everything. So it's really like being a shepherd, but in a different way, in a different vein, but a way that fits me.
So after a year, you've got this newfound clarity.
Yeah.
And it built on things that you've done before.
Yeah.
So there's an experience level you had, there's a talent you have, there's a gifting you have.
Yeah.
It's all these things.
Yeah.
God almost paused you.
Yeah.
had you stop
Yeah.
and then start over,
Yeah.
even though the starting over is built upon
A
what
lot of
you've
the
done.
same things. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So I'd say, so there's the
That's cool.
basketball, but then also this calling and desire around spiritual formation.
Okay.
This idea of helping people follow Jesus in a way that transforms their life.
Yeah.
Spiritual rhythms, thinking about your inner life and prayer life. So that's been this thing that's just gets more fine-tuned for me, I think, as
Yeah.
I get older. And I was telling you about a course I'm taking in spiritual direction. But I think part of me is realizing that I have these two things that are connected but not, and they're both a big part of how God's moving me.
They have a little bit of an overlap.
Yeah, they do have an overlap,
but they're distinct.
But they're distinct. And a part of my process has even been of wanting my life to fit in a cleaner box,
Yeah.
like wanting my life to look good on a one-page Word doc,
Fair enough.
or even my ministry to fit that, and then getting to a point of realizing, it doesn't in a way that maybe I wanted it to, but there's also clarity at the same time.
Yeah.
There's these two things that I know God keeps calling me into, and I keep doing. Whether I'm trying to or not, I'm gonna do these two
Right.
things with my life.
Now, I think I know the answer to this question,
Yeah.
but a year ago, you could not have said those two things this clearly.
Not with such clarity.
Yeah.
Not
So-
not with such. I had hints though, for sure.
Yeah, hence.
And I think if in a healthy moment, I would have said those two. But I had layers of stuff on top of that.
Yeah. But you wouldn't have succinctly said there's two areas in my
No,
life.
not
There's
as
a
succinctly.
slight overlap.
Yeah.
Here's what the,
I think I knew that, but I wasn't confident.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have been confident. And I think a lot of that is, for me at least, this journey of this birth. There's the what will I do, like the position, the title.
Okay.
There's or even the container of the things I'll spend my time on.
Okay.
Is very much connected to a birth process of God helping me become a new version of me.
Yeah, I totally get that.
And so I'd say a year ago, if somebody would have helped me, and I probably did have these moments where like someone helped me get to that point of realizing, I know there's these two related things that I'm supposed to keep doing, but I was so wound up in my own insecurity,
Yeah.
wrestling with moments of failure, wrestling with who I thought people needed me to be or wanted me to be,
Yeah.
or what looked good to other people.
And what your ministry job expected you to be.
Yeah, and
I mean,
what
you had
people expect me.
responsibilities.
Yeah, what people expect me to be. So I think parallel to this, God is birthing this thing of who I am in the world. It's what I'm doing, but it's also like this deep work that I keep sensing God is saying, we're going to figure this out over time. This birth is happening, but the almost more important work or combined work is it's time for you to become the next version of you.
Right.
Like it's time for you with your identity, with who you are, with how you find your identity in God as God's son, and not how special I am or who likes what I do, and kind of just letting go of a lot of stuff.
Right.
That I mean, some people call it a disordered attachment. So I've had these attachments to things that I thought I'd gotten over,
Right.
and realizing like, no, I'm wound up in all these ways trying to please everybody.
That's so Abraham-like, right? Go to a place I'm not going to tell you yet, and leave the only people you're familiar with that you love, and do what I'm not really even going to share with you yet.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
but it'll happen.
But it'll happen.
Yeah.
And then slowly he unfolds it.
Yeah.
But really slowly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, here's your call. You're going to be the father of a huge nation.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, there's going to be a land that I'm going to give you.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, now you're in Egypt. So that's not the land.
Yeah.
So what am I doing in Egypt? I just went left when I was supposed to go right.
And for me, like I had that moment of January of telling people, I'm going to sit down. And people kept asking me to explain what I was saying. And I was like, the easiest thing I can say is, I know God's telling me to sit down for a minute.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how to explain it better.
Yeah.
And I thought I did. I mean, I took a little time off. I worked slower, but was still churning in a lot of ways, and was trying to put the pieces back together as fast as I could. Yeah. And then COVID hit. And I actually had plans on I had Word docs of like, okay, here's where and then COVID hit, and anything on my Word docs couldn't happen anymore.
It went away.
It went away, and I was really forced.
Meaning he really made it easy.
Really, yeah. And it, like in Oakland, like once the first shelter in place, I mean, everybody in Oakland, like we really sheltered in place, just as a cultural way. Like with all my friends in Oakland, it was like everything shut down, and it forced me to go back again and work at home and sit in the backyard and realizing, oh, like it was like God inviting me, okay, we tried this one way. Now now you're really in your backyard.
So tell me
longer.
I want to look at both sides of this.
Yeah.
What's been the most beautiful part of this process? Because for well over a year, God has been leaking out their idea to you. And he's still doing it.
Yeah. Beautiful to sense God moving in my life.
Yeah.
So to me, I heard Rebecca Johnson say this in an interview, I want to be fully alive.
Yeah.
And I heard her say that, and it's like, yeah, I want to be fully alive.
Yeah.
And I want God to be active with me. And I want to hear God's voice. So,
and you're never going to be fully alive apart from them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if they sit together
Yeah.
and say, wouldn't it be cool if we now took all these experiences and talents and giftings within Nate and his own passions and desires, and we reformatted them. We took the clay and remolded it to something else. Wouldn't that be cool if we did that with Nate? That's where life is.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's going to produce something because God produces stuff.
Yeah.
But their desire is far greater than just producing something. It's the co-participation with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So that to me, like, I'm glad to be able to hear God's voice.
Right.
Even if it is whispers sometimes.
And unclear.
But to be in the process of like, oh, I know God's doing something.
Right.
I feel alive when I'm in that mode of feeling like God's with me.
Do you feel like you have 100% clarity on this now? Or
I
you feel like you have a lot more clarity?
Oh, I feel like I have a lot of clarity.
Yeah.
But there's still, it's like, how does it get wound up with a bow?
Which is
if that makes
amazing
sense?
because you and I sat at the green table. Jared was teasing me. He goes, hey, when can I get a session at the green table? Like, what are you talking about? You and I met at the green table outside Creekside. It's become a very holy place for me, which it never was before because I've just met with so many people from our church. You and I have spent a lot of hard times there. You and I had a lot of times together where you're like, Doug, I just don't know what God's doing. Like, I don't know where he's taking me. I don't, not afraid, but just like disoriented.
Yeah.
So let's take that.
Yeah.
What's been the most difficult part of this process? Where God has birthed an idea and he's now leaking it, as it were.
Yeah.
And that's your term.
I think false starts have been hard. So I've had moments where something came across, either a position or an idea where like, oh, this is how it all fits together.
Like what? Give me one.
Like an organization that I'm aware of, that people are super like-minded to me and, hung out with them like, oh, I should just join, this group of super like-minded people. And then was like, oh, actually, once I got down the road, I don't know if that's the best thing.
So
So even before this, God was already working on me. But the year previous to this, I was a part-time associate pastor at a local church. And I thought this all fits. There's a gym I use half my time. And it seemed on paper like this was it. And I held on to that. And then I realized pretty quickly, this isn't at all where I should be.
Wow.
And there was a pain. Yeah. Pretty quickly.
Wow.
So there's even a pain of that, of like, oh, I've thought this was it, and it seemed like it was, and it's not. But I think the hardest part
false start
with the pregnancy thing is with a human pregnancy, it's going to be around 9 months.
Right.
So there's rare times when it's early and it's dangerous, but
right.
And maybe it's 2 weeks early, right? A week late, but you have that 9 month, right?
Right.
I mean, I've gone through this 3 times with my wife being pregnant, and okay, next April-ish, we're gonna. But with this, it's this sense of having to trust when the bow gets, when it gets really tied up, because it's like, oh, I can feel it heading here, and
you don't know what sex it is, and you don't know the size and the temperament,
and you don't know that is it January or March, or is it just or is it just going to be a really, really slow, hill towards that.
And then after that, is this an easy baby, a difficult baby? Will this baby sleep, not sleep?
Or is this wrapped up in, lots and lots of pain and suffering? So I think not knowing how it wraps up is hard. Not having, okay, Nate, in March, on March 1st,
right.
I'm going to send you a Word doc.
100% clarity.
I'm going to send you a Word doc from heaven of how the next, how the next 10 years go for you and how to say it. But even in that, Doug, when I've sat with God and wrestled with that, I've had this overwhelming sense from God of, like, you're pretty much there already, right?
Right.
What else do you need? Like, what to do tomorrow. You're going to train these 5 guys. Then you're going to go write a sermon and then you're going to go, work with your middle school guys. So what do you needing.
So he's saying to you, what else are you looking for?
Yeah, and a part of what the last 3 months has been getting down to, part of what I need is to know how to say it to other people so they respect it. So I've had this deep moment the last couple of months of realizing, I know what I'm like.
Yeah.
I'm okay. It's pretty much there. What do I need? Yeah, I think part of my need has been to validate myself to others.
Yeah, right.
Which is, in practical sense, you have to,
Yeah,
right? To have a nonprofit.
These are people that are supporting
you have to, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
on one sense, you have to a certain extent. On the other
But you're saying it's more
side,
than that.
I'm saying on a deep level, I hear God saying, "Yeah, you know what you're doing.
Just do it.
Just do it." And do the things you have to be responsible. But why are you so worried about everybody thinking it makes sense or is impressive? Like let it go.
Your idea of the false starts, it's really a powerful idea.
Hmm.
I mean, because I resonate with that too. I think everybody will resonate. Why do you think we gravitate towards, this makes sense?
Yeah. I think for me, I want it all to make sense in a tight box where it looks good, where it's simple to me. Right. You know what I mean? It's clear, and even to others as part of it. But what's helped me in that, like I was meeting with a spiritual director and working through that and feeling like a failure in some of those moments where I've done something for a season and didn't work out. And she challenged me of, there's failure in there maybe, but what if that was just a part of your journey that God had you on? Right. And what if you learned things in that and other people learned things in that? And that was maybe that was supposed to be a year of doing that. And that was that was the way that God is birthing something.
And what if they actually have your best interest in mind?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What if they are actually trustworthy? It's interesting.
Yeah.
I shared in the message, I've been through this a few times now. And so it only took me about a year to figure out I was in one of those times again, which is fantastic for me. Fantastic. And you realize in this, it is about trust. You know, Moses didn't have a whole lot to go on, and he just went. Noah, he knew the task, but I don't think he really could have known everything that was really. Joseph is in a cage in a wagon. You know, there's no way this guy knew. Like, what is God? Like, God is literally bringing him to Egypt. Yeah, you know, and then he has this horrible experience with Potiphar's wife, and he's in prison, and God's like, it's perfect. So, I mean, and in the end, we read the end of these stories and we go, gosh, isn't God magnificent? Yeah. But in the middle of it, in the middle of the disorientation, you know, the lack of clarity, the false starts, I thought that was it. I thought it's not easy. But it really does boil down to whether or not the three of them have come up with an idea that isn't just to use you, but they really want to link with you in birthing something really cool. Yeah. For you, for the world, for your relationship with God. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And somehow we have to be able to be settled in that moment.
And to trust.
Yeah. And to have what you have, which is the sensitivity to test your heart over and over to say, God, is this a false start? Or am I doing this just because it makes sense? Or is it really where my heart resonates? Is it where you're beating inside of me? That's really cool.
Yeah. And I think learning to be confident in God and humble at the same time, if that makes sense.
No, go ahead and describe it.
Like learning to be confident that God's working. Like God is working with me. I am hearing God's voice. And also humble to realize sometimes I don't hear right. And sometimes I think I know what God's doing, and then it's maybe a little different when it gets there. Yeah. Like a humility to realize, that's a long journey, and I got to keep learning and following as it unfolds.
And people might have input that might be helpful, but not everybody's going to understand.
Yeah,
not everybody's going to really get. And I think you know, our church, on behalf of you, as an example, but on behalf of all of us, we need to be able to realize there's a mystical thing going on between God and each of us. And to not be afraid to speak into that, but also have the courage to remain quiet. And and honor what God may be doing that may not make any sense to any of us.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's been a part of my journey in this pregnancy too, is realizing like we need humans to speak into us.
Right.
Like we need deep friends, mentors, different, different kinds of people speaking into us. But I've been learning how do I be intentional about spending time with those people?
Right.
Like someone like you. I trust you implicitly. Like you, I feel like you get me. So times talking to you is fruitful, like God speaks.
Yeah, likewise.
So how do I push into those spaces where I know God moves? And then how do I also let go of certain relationships or conversations that I know might not be helpful in a season?
Trying to pull you in the wrong direction.
I'm going to have a boundary from certain people or areas or groups where I know it's not helpful right now.
You're pulling against the very thing God is trying to birth.
And maybe and not with bad intentions.
No.
But I've realized I have to let certain people go or conversations go.
Right.
And maybe that already happened that hurt me.
Right.
Or that I know might happen again, and say, I need a break from that conversation or that whatever that is.
Right.
But press into folks that I know when I'm with, the Spirit is moving, and that's a part, because there's probably a handful of people that I know are a part of the journey of God speaking to me.
That's cool. Thank you. I know this is a very vulnerable conversation, but I don't know when I don't have a vulnerable conversation. So thanks for coming out and doing this with us.
My pleasure.
We
An honor.
so support you and so are behind you and what you're doing for the kingdom and with God.
Thanks, Doug.
We're proud to be associated with you.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Love you, man.
You too.
The Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turned His face toward you and give you peace. Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turned His face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 Dios te guarde y bendiga, resplandezca su rostro y gracia en ti esté mire con agrado y te dé paz. Oh, oh, oh. Cantamos y Amen. 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 declare this. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. Yeah.